Welcome, everyone. My name is Shabri Vickers. I use she, her pronouns, and I serve as the Vice President Community Development Officer at Wells Fargo. And on behalf of the Asset Funders Network, I would like to welcome you to today's Equity Amplifier conversation. Equity Amplifier is a series that highlights the voices of organizations or nonprofits led by and that focus on building economic security and asset building for communities of color. So the intent is to connect leaders of color to members of the philanthropic community and ensure that there is alignment on how best to support diverse communities. And so with that, I feel extremely honored to welcome to our virtual space here, Carlos Garcia, who is the Executive Director of Neighborhood Partnerships, and Dr. Andres Lopez, Research Director of the Research Justice Institute of the Coalition of Communities of Color here in Oregon. And both are steering committee members of the Oregon Economic Justice Roundtable. Hello, Carlos and Andres.
Hola.
Hi, Shabri. Good afternoon.
Hello. Thank you both so much for joining us. I'm excited about this conversation that we'll have today. And, you know, I'm just going to ask you, Carlos, to share a little bit more about what the Oregon Economic Justice Roundtable is. And as you do that, I'd like to say, we here at Wells Fargo, loved being able to be in conversation with you as a part of the Roundtable. And we have been early seed funders of the Oregon Economic Justice Roundtable, and more recently, continuous funders of not only the work, but also the action behind what folks at the Roundtable are asking for. So I'm really excited to have this conversation. Can you tell us a little bit more about the OEJR?
Sure, Shabri. Again, my name is Carlos David Garcia, and I have the privilege to serve as the Executive Director of Neighborhood Partnerships. We're a statewide nonprofit organization whose mission is to help create a better Oregon, one in which we all have access to opportunity, stability, and what we need to thrive. We are also one of the groups that initially co-convenes the Oregon Economic Justice Roundtable. So to give an overview of the Roundtable, the Oregon Economic Justice Roundtable is a shared table of funders and community organizations working across the state of Oregon that center Black, Indigenous, Latinx, and other people of color in order to advance economic justice so that all communities thrive. So for almost 2 years now, the challenge that we've kind of set ourselves with and has been to co-create a vision for something new, to imagine how we enact bold and liberatory vision for what community-centered work looks like, and will really guide and support racial and economic justice. We seek to root a culture and a community in Oregon that nourishes a sense of belonging, of dignity, of respect among and between people and communities. And we've talked about working toward an environment where we all can live beyond the basic needs of safety and security and into the freedom to actualize our dreams and the power of communities to control their own economic destiny. And for that to happen, we ultimately need to seek transformative narrative, policy, and system change that supports that vision for economic justice. As we work toward that, we've been working up against a rigid system and structures that were not built for this purpose. So we really need to be intentional about dismantling those racist and oppressive structures that perpetuate inequitable treatment throughout our systems. I quickly also wanted to talk about some of the goals of the Roundtable. And again, I've mentioned a couple of them, but one is to really be a new approach to doing things differently that supports our vision. Again, really thinking about this work really is based on relationships and really building trusting relationships between our community-based organizations and our funders. To really work through and have really open, honest conversations that are needed to move the dial. To co-create solutions and strategies together. We know that we're not going to do this work alone, and we need to be able to organize and bring folks together to build power, to move toward collective action, to advance the type of systems changes that we want to see. The other item that we've set out as a goal is to really change the narrative. We need to shift narratives to of who's deserving of wealth and power by making visible the unwritten rules that support white privilege and hold people from other communities back. So really developing a framework to be able to discuss and bring up new narratives that are centered in community, that really tell the story of the richness found within communities. And I think the last piece is we've talked about really being a hub for economic justice and thinking about having a very focused work on what economic justice and wealth building strategies and solutions can be that are community driven and community led. And that those are, we've talked a lot about tackling root causes of racial and economic justice to really focus on fixing systems and not people. And so how can we ultimately move to the policy solutions that are needed to support the bold transformational change that we want to see across our state?
Carlos, first of all, thank you so much. You really, wrap that up, I think, in such a fantastic way. And I just want to pull out a few of the things that you said. You talked about liberation, and you talked about power, and you talked about transformative change, really to ensure that we can co-create towards economic justice. And those are big, lofty goals, and it requires that we do business differently. And you mentioned that. I think, really moving up in the pace of trust and building relationships, I think, is something that we can't look for a quick way to do that, right? And so, Dr. Lopez, Andres, I'd love for you to share with me, how does the Oregon Economic Justice Roundtable do business differently? And what does it mean to really center community and prioritize organizations led by people of color? And what does that mean in terms of your leadership, and really how does that translate for the work that you are doing in communities that you serve?
Thank you for that question. I think I'll pick up where you sort of were leaving us off there, thinking about going slowly, right? Taking our time. I think what I valued most about this group is that we are not rushing to conclusions, to outcomes, to strategies, that there has been a lot of getting to know each other, sharing our perspective, sharing what we know, what we don't know, a lot of consensus building. And we really have done that at a pace that feels good and makes sense during a really challenging few years. So that is very different. I think most groups try to get to that finish line a lot quicker, and in that process miss really some fundamental steps to do things differently. So the slower pace and being intentional, but then also the cross-sector approach, right? There's so many different entities and organizations and perspectives are required to really address economic justice, and bringing this roundtable together has just been a really profound way to understand how big the sort of map is of economic justice and all the various ways in which folks are doing that work. I think there's a lot of people doing economic justice without realizing they're doing economic justice because there's not a clear container to sort of place themselves in, or a community to surround themselves in. So I think the roundtable provides that. And I think that's a big part of our successes to date.
I absolutely agree. And I just, I think about over the past few years that we've been doing this, the amount of times that I've talked about the Economic Justice Roundtable and folks whose ears and ears perk up and they're really interested. And then the places that we've been able to literally do that cross-sector approach. And I think about Carlos, you and the team were able to come and talk to the Oregon Bankers Association BIPOC Task Force, right? So there are groups, within industry, banking industry, that are asking, what are some of these we can do, and how can we do it in partnership with this group? And so I think, Andres, you really got to the point there, and I'm excited about the work that continues to happen
I'd like to add on to Andres's point. One of the things that we see is that, there's work that happens and all of a sudden then we want to just have a focus group or check in with community-based organizations. But really starting from the get-go, how are we changing and including community from the get-go to create the table, to start the conversation, to outline what the goals and the vision of the work is going to be. And from the start, we were pretty intentional about making sure that the roundtable was led and was made up of predominantly a majority Black, Indigenous, and other people of color leaders to start the conversation there. And then also for us to really think about how are we going to do the work and how are we going to do it differently, and how do we co-create this structure. And we set out to really think about our guiding principles around equity and racial justice, that we wanted to boldly and intentionally dismantle systems that continue to perpetuate harm in our communities, that we thought about intersectionality, and that we value the analysis of how different forms of oppression intersect with race to better target strategies that address these inequities. Thinking about community-driven solutions. Again, we feel that solutions are closest to those impacted. So thus our policies, our narratives, and our practices need to be co-created with those communities from the start. Talking about systems and policy solutions, we want to again fix systems, not people. And then again, collective action. We value organized, collective, and sustained action, and that's what's going to need to really build the movement needed to reach our big, lofty goals.
Carlos, thank you so much for going back with me there. I think that was so important. And as a funder, those were the things that made me literally, even towards the end of my funding year, say I have to find some dollars to support this. And then the next year I have to increase those things and increase that support. And the very decisive, intentional work that the group has been doing, I think is what is gathering more, investment from others and more insight and folks who are excited about it.